Okay, so the goals and priorities for CKAF under the new framework are to increase access and inclusivity. So we're looking to expand access to the arts through inclusive activities that reflect the diversity of Kingston's artists, audiences, and cultural landscape, and then address systemic barriers to ensure all residents can engage in meaningful artistic experiences. As always, we want to support Kingston artists. So we want to ensure that Kingston artists receive professional opportunities with equitable, fair compensation and support artist creation and experimentation within their practice. The third priority is to foster creativity and community engagement. So we're supporting projects that nurture creativity and inspire engagement within the arts amongst residents. We want to ensure that there's a diverse offering of programs that reflect the needs, values, and interests of the Kingston community and that emphasize inclusivity and cultural relevance. We are also looking to build capacity and resiliency, which of course is of particular importance to the operating grant program. So we're looking to strengthen the organizational capacity and promote the resilience of arts organizations and the industry at large through sustained and expanded support. And finally, we want to encourage collaboration and partnerships. So we're looking to support partnerships within the arts sector and across public and private sectors to drive innovation and shared resources, to support multidisciplinary collaboration, and to enhance the reach and impact of arts programming. We do have some expanded grant application supports this year because we are committed to indigenization, inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. And we strive to make our granting processes more accessible. Applicants with accessibility needs are encouraged to contact us as early in the application period as possible to request accommodations for your grant application. Of course, we will consider requests for accommodations at any point in the process, but just as some accommodations take some time to put in place, we do encourage you to reach out as early as you can. The application supports that we offer include, providing ASL interpretation at public CKAF information sessions. I forgot to introduce our interpreters, Alex and Amanda, who are here with us today. Thank you for being here. We also facilitate online or in-person meetings for any applicants or potential applicants. We can provide access notes for in-person meetings, so that those are notes that include all of the accessibility features of our building. They tell you about parking, about the spacing of doorways, restrooms, things like that. And we also offer ASL interpretation for virtual meetings. We're, of course, happy to offer ASL interpretation for in-person meetings as well, if you have an interpreter who's available to work with you. But if you have experience with this, you'll know it can be kind of difficult to secure ASL interpretation on short notice. So generally, we keep that to virtual meetings. New this year, we also now provide financial support of up to $500 towards grant writing services for applicants who are deaf, living with a disability, who do not have a working proficiency in English, or who struggle with literacy. This type of support has to be requested and approved by KAC no later than April 23rd, 2026, which is next Thursday. So if you're interested in that type of support, please reach out as soon as possible. We also provide recommendations for services or tools that may be of use to artists with accessibility needs. And if there's a gap in our knowledge, we're happy to do some research to find tools that may be helpful for you. And finally, alternate forms of support, including things like alternative submission methods, for components of an application can be considered upon request. So please contact us if there's another way we can make the application process more accessible for you, and we'd be happy to consider it. Okay, CKAF Operating Grants. These are annual grants to support the operations, programs, and services of a wide range of nonprofit arts organizations. CKAF Operating Grants are usually expected to be renewable grants based on the assessment and decision-making provisions outlined in the framework. Applications are open, you obviously know that. The deadline to book a consultation is next Thursday, and the application deadline is Thursday, May 7th. You can anticipate results in July or August 2026, and the dates are subject to change. Okay. So in terms of booking a consultation, first-time operating grant applicants are required to book a consultation with KAC staff by April 23rd, 2026. So we don't need to have the meeting by then necessarily, but if you are interested in applying for operating grants and you haven't received an operating grant through CKAF before, you do have to request a consultation meeting by next Thursday. And that's just so we can meet with you to assess your eligibility for this program. Again, the application deadline is Thursday, May 7th. CKAF operating grants are intended to support the recipient organization's operations and programming for their fiscal year ending in 2027. So generally speaking, that is your 2026 to 2027 fiscal year. And the grant amounts range from $10,000 to $65,000. To be eligible for a CKAF operating grant, you have to meet all of the eligibility criteria outlined in the guidelines, and they're organized into three categories. So the first one is you have to have an existing funding relationship with the City of Kingston. So that can mean either you currently receive a CKAF operating grant, or you have previously received 2 or more CKAF project grants. And again, you have to book a consultation with KAC staff to assess your eligibility. The other eligibility criteria are under the operations and mandate and the financial headings. So under operations and mandate, you first off have to be an incorporated nonprofit arts organization for a minimum of 2 years. If you are an organization situated within a multi-purpose institution, like a library, university, or a museum, you have to be able to clearly demonstrate your independence from the multi-purpose institution. You have to be able to fulfill all eligibility requirements separately and distinctly from that organization. That includes a fully segregated and itemized financial statement, as well as a board of directors or advisory body that is solely responsible for the organization. Additionally, alternative structures may be considered to facilitate Indigenous agency at the discretion of the KAC and the City of Kingston. So if your organization has a different makeup and you fall under that category, please reach out to us and we can assess your eligibility for the program. You also need to have paid professional staff and leadership in both artistic and administrative roles. You need to be governed by a board of directors or other equivalent body that is responsible for the organization. And you need to be physically located, meaning your registered address that you're incorporated under has to be located within the City of Kingston, and you have to deliver programs and services within the City of Kingston. Additionally, organizations registered in nearby areas, including First Nation or Indigenous communities, may be considered eligible, again at the discretion of the KAC and the city, provided that the majority of your activities occur within the City of Kingston. You also have to have a mandate and history of consistent annual delivery of arts programs and services in support of that mandate for at least 2 years. You must work for the benefit of the Kingston arts sector, including its communities, audiences, and art forms. And as always, you have to compensate artists and arts workers and demonstrate efforts to meet industry standard rates at minimum. In terms of financial eligibility criteria, you need to have independently prepared financial statements. They have to be signed by 2 of your board members, and these can be audited financial statements, review and engagement reports, or compilation statement, depending on the grant request and your operating budget. And there's a little table here to explain that, but the details are also included in the guidelines. You also have to demonstrate a range of revenue sources on an annual basis. So you have to have some earned government and private sector revenues. New this year, your CKAF funding request can't exceed 30% of your revenue or expense totals reported from your last completed fiscal year. So what that means is your 2024 to 2025 audited fiscal year or equivalent, whichever is lower of your revenue or expenses. So generally, they'll be pretty consistent with each other. But for example, if you pulled in $300,000 in revenue, but you only spent $200,000 in expenses, we're looking at 30% of that $200,000 in expenses, and vice versa. And finally, you have to be in good standing with the City of Kingston. So you can't have any outstanding grant final reports or outstanding invoices or anything like that. Okay, in terms of ineligibility, if your organization does not have an arts mandate, it would not be eligible. You may be eligible for other streams, but just because of the nature of operating funding, the organization does have to be mandated for the arts. We also do not fund organizations that directly deliver curriculum-based education or based on the pursuit of a post-secondary diploma or degree. We also don't fund organizations that are based on fundraising or building awareness for a third party, like a charitable cause or a religious movement, or organizations that are focused on religious practice or the goal to change religious belief. Operating grants do not fund commercial for-profit businesses. And finally, organizations already receiving funding from the city through other sources. So if you have a service level agreement with the city, or if you're receiving funding through another city grant program, you wouldn't be eligible. And organizations can only receive funding through one CKAF grant stream annually. So for example, if you get operating funds, you won't be able to apply for project funds in the summer. Finally, if your organization is seeking operational funding, but your mandate is primarily focused on the delivery of an arts festival, you should be applying through the new CKAF Festival grant stream. And we do have an information session for that stream on Thursday. In terms of expenses and activities that are ineligible, we include significant capital purposes like purchasing or renovating a building or major equipment. We don't fund for-profit ventures or projects that advantage a for-profit partner. We do not fund fundraising or recovering the costs of an organization's financial deficits. And finally, programs or services delivered by an organization aligned with any political party or religious group. Excuse me. A complete operating grant application consists of your application form. New this year, we also have a budget form and a statistics form. So we are no longer using CADAC, that's CADAC. We now have our own budget form and statistics form that we're using. We also have a programming form that you have to complete that includes both your previous year or your current year program list, as well as your request year list. New this year, we've also added a board of directors and staff list. And finally, you need to submit your year-end financial statements and 5 pieces of supplementary material. In terms of the submission process, just a few things to note. If your application is missing required documents or signatures, it will be considered incomplete or ineligible. So just make sure you're checking all the boxes. There is a checklist on the application form. We do not accept additional documents. So for example, if you submitted a separate document with a bunch of explanations for your budget form, we will not pass that along to the jury. We only accept the required documents. And just a reminder, do not alter any of the forms in any way beyond filling out the designated fields. There are instructions on how to label your files in the guidelines, which are also copied here. Essentially, it's 2026 underscore organization name underscore document type. And then you put all of your application components into one email and send it off to grants@artskingston.ca. Okay, so we're just going to talk about the specific forms briefly. So the application forms are fillable PDF forms. You have to complete them using Adobe Acrobat Reader, which can be downloaded for free. Each text box has a maximum character limit of 2,500 characters. We don't generally recommend using the full character limit for all of the questions. That's quite a lot of writing. But we just set them all to the same limit to give people room for areas where they feel they may need to include more information, especially just in this first year with these new forms. Applications have to be signed by 2 of your signing authorities, and just make sure you complete all of the components of the application before you add those digital signatures. A couple extra notes on the application forms. They're organized into sections aligned with the assessment criteria. So when you're reviewing the assessment criteria, you will know which questions you're answering to get those criteria points. Just a note on question number 13, it asks to discuss plans for accumulated surpluses or deficits. So if your organization has an accumulated deficit, we want to see your deficit reduction plan. And if you have an accumulated surplus, or like a significant accumulated surplus, we want to know kind of why it's there, what the rationale is behind it, if it's there to cushion in case of a loss of a specific grant stream, or if you're working towards a bigger purchase, anything like that. If you can just explain those plans for us and provide the jury with some context on why that funding exists. Finally, there is a current year report, which is only required if you received an operating grant from us in 2025. So if you haven't, just ignore that section. Okay, the budget form has to be completed. So you're filling out columns C to G, and you have to submit it as an Excel file. Please do not submit the budget in PDF form. Make sure not to alter the form or edit the automatic calculations. And you can review the instructions and definitions tab for examples on each line and details about how to fill out the form. So you just have a little screenshot to demonstrate what the form looks like. So you're completing each of these columns, C through G. You can see at the bottom there, you can navigate between tabs. Depending on what application you're using to fill out the form, those tabs might be at the top, but they will be there either at the bottom or the top. So you can see the instructions and definitions and the budget form. You can also insert your organization name at the top. If you forget, it's not a big deal, but it's helpful if you do. And then there's a drop-down menu for the funding status column where you will indicate if amounts are confirmed, pending, or estimated for your request year. The instructions and definitions page kind of breaks down what's going on in each column, whether or not you have to fill it out. So please review that. For folks who have used CADAC in the past, there is a column A on the instructions and definitions form that will show you where you'll find the relevant lines in CADAC. And so you're filling out column C to D. So column C is your previous year, that's 2024 to 2025. Those will be your confirmed actuals as outlined in your financial statements. I will say there's a little error on the form. I think it says do not edit orange highlighted cells. That should be blue. Sorry about that. We've since updated that. And then your current year is your 2025 to 2026 year. In some cases, like KAC, our fiscal year ends in March 31st. So technically, the current year that we're in is 26-27, but just go by the dates. So you're going by 2025 to 2026, even if it has just recently completed. And then your request year, as I said before, is your 2026 to 2027 fiscal year. And we're looking for your projected budget for that year. We want to see budget notes explaining details for your revenue and expense items, but only for the request year column, unless there's something significant that you feel the need to comment on. So if you have, if you've received, for example, an OAC operating grant in your previous year, in your current year, and then there's nothing there in your request year, you might want to add a note there about why that funding is no longer there. Otherwise, we're just looking for information on the request year. We do ask for relevant breakdowns or calculations. Of course, we're not looking for every dollar to be accounted for. If you have a $500,000 budget, we're not looking for every single item. But if you can include kind of groups, like an overview and general breakdowns. So if you have multiple grants in one revenue line, you might want to say this grant, 30,000, that grant, 10,000, things like that. And then for things like artist fees or staff fees, kind of breaking down either the fee per position, or if there's like, say you offer $2,000 per artist times 5 artists, something like that. Okay. As I mentioned before, there's now a funding status column, and it's a drop-down menu, so you can just indicate whether things are confirmed, pending, or estimated. And again, that's with reference to your request year. There are definitions and examples for every single line item, so please review those. And of course, if you have questions, let us know. And as I mentioned before, there are CADAC line ranges there where you can find, if you're working off of your CADAC forms, you can find where that information will be. Okay. There's also a line for adjustments affecting your surplus or deficit. So if you have an interfund transfer or anything else that needs to be added in there, you can utilize that line and make sure that you provide us with notes to explain it. And finally, the statement of financial position section is only for your 2024 to 2025 audited year. The statistics form should be completed and submitted as an Excel file, and instructions and definitions can be found on that form. I won't dig into it too much. It's just those columns there that you need to fill out. There are CADAC lines for references, again, if you're using CADAC. And there is an optional notes section, which you don't need to use, but if there's a significant jump or drop in your stats moving into your request here, you may want to add a little note there to explain. Totally optional. The programming form includes your current year program list and your request year program list. So again, please make sure that you're completing both lists and then submitting it as an Excel file. And you can utilize the tabs to navigate between the two. This is kind of the overview. So there's some instructions there. We ask that you don't exceed 25 words per cell. It's a fair bit. You probably won't need more than that. And just list your programs in chronological order. And you can see here, I'm zoomed in on that examples and definitions table. So one thing I just wanted to point out is in your participating artists section, we ask that you put an asterisk after each Kingston-based artist. And there's examples there of how you might do that. And then for your request here, you might have some roles that are to be determined. So we also ask that you do that. And if it's a role that will be selected but is reserved for Kingston-based artists, you can add that asterisk as well. And that's what it looks like. In the case of this form, this is one that you could alter if you needed to add more cells. Okay. Moving on to the board and staff lists. Again, this is a form with two different tabs, so just make sure that you fill out both and that you submit a single Excel file. So this is what the board list looks like. We are looking for their name, role. Oh, are we on? There we go. Thanks. Yeah, there's name, role, date appointed, what committees they're on, where they're located, and what their expertise is, and there's explanation for each. And then the staff list, we're asking for the staff member, their name or pseudonym, their title, the position type, so whether they're full-time, part-time, if it's a permanent position, a contract position, things like that. And then key roles and responsibilities, we ask you not to exceed 50 words. Again, 50 words is quite a bit. You probably won't need that much. But if your organization has a lot of staff members, you may have very short descriptions versus if your organization has, say, 3 staff members, you might need to use a little more of that space because they're probably operating in a way that covers multiple roles within one. Okay, for supplementary material, you have to submit 5 pieces to support your application. So this is images, text, video, or audio files that illustrate the artistic merit and impact of the organization. I won't get into specifics here. All of this information is included on the guidelines, but I will just flag that if you're submitting video, you can give us timestamps to make sure that you don't exceed the maximum time limit. So for example, you could say, please view from minute 1 to 3. So that otherwise, if we don't have that, we'll just tell the jury to watch the first, 2 minutes of this, 2 minutes of that, whatever. Your supplementary materials should illustrate the artistic merit and impact of your organization. They should be relevant to your application. They should be high quality and impactful and submitted according to the guidelines that I referenced before. Operating grant applications are assessed in our 5 assessment criteria categories, which are also new this year. So we have artistic mandate, artistic programming and service quality, impact and benefit to Kingston residents, financial management and viability, and finally, leadership, administration, and governance. In preparation for adjudication, jurors will assign each of the assessment criteria a score on a scale of 1 to 5. And then as we get into the meeting, we kind of talk about it more, and there's a secondary score. But that's that kind of initial score, and these are the headings under which we're discussing and assessing the applications. So for artistic mandate, we're looking for a clearly defined mission, vision, and values that respond to a clear need in Kingston's arts sector. And we want to see that there are clear commitments to equity in your vision, mission, and values. Under artistic programming and service quality, we want to see that programs and or services advance your mission, advance a particular discipline or practice, and are of a quality to merit public support. We also want to see that meaningful opportunities and resources are provided for artists so that they can lead, develop, create, and present their work and develop their practice, and that you're ensuring recognition and representation of artists from equity-deserving communities. We're also looking for a commitment to hiring Kingston artists and compensating artists and employees at industry standard rates. We're looking for a contribution to sector development, meaning the arts sector, including opportunities for professional development and collaboration for emerging and established artists and groups, and a demonstration of informed and respectful delivery of programming related to Indigenous and equity-deserving groups. Under impact and benefit to Kingston residents, we're looking for a commitment to developing and or engaging audiences and participants that reflect the diversity of Kingston. We want to see accessibility plans and practices in place to ensure access to participation. And we want to see that the organization understands and articulates the impact of its programs and or services, community needs, and that you have strategies to assess and respond to community needs or demand. And finally, that there is a returning, consistent, or growing participation in your programs and or services. Under financial management and viability, we are looking for strong financial health, including diverse revenue sources and achievable budgets in relation to programs, services, operations, and longer-term plans. And we are looking to see that you have realistic budget projections, including an appropriate balance of programming and administrative expenses, and that your expenses are aligned with your revenues. And finally, that there is a demonstrated need for an impact of city funding, and if applicable, appropriate plans are in place to reduce deficits and or to utilize accumulated surpluses. So again, that's where that question 13 that I mentioned earlier will come into play. And our final category, leadership, administration, and governance. We're looking to see that leadership has the relevant experience, knowledge, and skills to manage the organization and contribute to the advancement of the arts sector. That the organization has a strong board or governing body that is diverse, has strong recruitment practices, and offers a range of skills and expertise to advance the organization's mission. A demonstrated commitment to the well-being of staff and volunteers, including having defined policies and practices in place to ensure a healthy workplace culture. And finally, that equity planning initiatives are implemented or in development and resourced accordingly. And you'll notice as you go through the application form that a lot of the application form questions are directly reflecting the assessment criteria. In previous CKAF application years, they were a little more general criteria and then application form questions that weren't as directly aligned. So we've tried as much as possible to make sure that the questions and the criteria are very directly aligned. There are some cases where you'll notice that a question, for example, in the financial management and viability question or section, the assessment criteria all kind of relate to all of the questions in that section as well as your budget form. But in some cases, they're very direct, like we'll ask, what are your accessibility practices? So hopefully that is a little clearer in the new model. Okay, also just wanted to touch on AI. So we recognize that AI tech can be leveraged as an accessibility tool, and it can support applicants in navigating the grant writing process, you know, in like composing written materials, brainstorming, things like that. So we don't bar applicants from using AI technologies to compose your written materials. However, the submission of supplementary materials, that's your photos, your videos, your audio, the submission of supplementary materials generated by AI is prohibited. So just be careful of that. And then we also kind of want to just caution applicants to, number one, make sure that all of the information included in your grant application is true and accurate. So if you are using AI to refine your writing or to help you brainstorm, just make sure that you're going through and ensuring that it is all true and accurate, because you do have to sign those forms stating that it is true and accurate. And then we also just recommend that applicants utilizing AI tools to support your grant writing process consider the potential risks, including things like the duplication of written materials amongst applicants. So this is something that a lot of organizations run into with things like grant applications or job applications, or exhibition applications, that sometimes you'll see similar written materials coming through if everyone has kind of used an LLM like ChatGPT. So just be careful of that. Also, again, just to reiterate, the accuracy of information is a risk with AI. So we've seen situations. I was chatting with a peer who said that she was using ChatGPT to edit a question for a grant application, and it added in statistics, and it was saying things like, we have this many newsletter subscribers and this many issues, and those numbers weren't accurate and they weren't her numbers. And she kind of asked it, where did these numbers come from? And ChatGPT responded saying, these are examples. So again, just be careful of that and make sure that you're reviewing those forms or those written materials, and that it's aligned with your intention and still accurate. Also be careful of data security. There is very little when you're using something like ChatGPT, so just don't put any of your confidential information in there. And finally, intellectual property concerns. So ensuring that the way that you're using it is to support your writing practice and not to kind of generate your ideas, because these models do learn based off of people's ideas. Yeah, and just finally, just make sure that you're reviewing anything that you run through AI, and then it's tailored to your organization and accurate, and then it doesn't kind of lose that emotional impact. Some quick grant writing tips. They may seem obvious, but some of these are the most common things that we run into when reviewing people's applications. So number one, read the guidelines. That is required before you begin your application. And then also make sure you refer back to them while you're writing. It can be really helpful when you get into that mode of kind of writing and you're deep in your own world to kind of check back on those guidelines and make sure you haven't lost that thread and that connection to the program. You want to also refer to the assessment criteria when answering each of the application questions. Or if you prefer to kind of do an initial brainstorm, make sure that when you're editing your written materials, you're going back, checking those criteria, and ensuring that you're kind of hitting those points or adjusting accordingly if you're not. Of course, not every application is going to score perfectly on every single criteria. You will have some areas of strength and some areas of improvement. That's okay. But you do want to kind of emphasize that alignment as much as possible. Okay, you want to review each question carefully and answer each aspect of the question clearly. Again, this is something that seems obvious, but it's an easy mistake to make. So for example, there's a question number 11 that asks about how you evaluate the impact of your programs and services on the sector and broader public, and how this affects your annual program or organizational plans. It would be very easy to miss a part of that question and to say, this is how we impact the sector, and forget about the public, or vice versa. Or to talk about your impact on the sector and public and then forget to add in how that affects your annual program or organizational plans. So as much as it seems obvious, just a reminder to check back and make sure you're ticking all of the boxes on that question. You want to be clear and concise. So avoid filler, avoid repetition. You want to be very direct and focus on a few key points. So one of the examples I use with project grant applicants is if we ask what your plan is if you have a shortfall in funds. We don't want to see, oh, we'll do fundraising, we'll sell merch, we'll do this and that, and, a whole big list, you're better off kind of saying, here's our primary strategy, and this is our secondary strategy. So just really clear and concise plans wherever possible, which leads into my next point: provide concrete plans wherever possible. It's totally fine for aspects of your programming to be in that to be determined stage, especially if you have something like, for example, an exhibition and you're doing an open call for local artists. Of course, you may not have all of those artists selected already. That's great. That's an opportunity for the public to be engaged. But in general, your plans are very concrete, and you have the idea behind that program with kind of spots intentionally saved for people to engage. You also want to make sure your application can be clearly understood. So we're looking for simple, direct language, and we're looking to see that you're not using, or rather, we recommend avoiding using too much arts jargon. It shouldn't require a PhD to understand your writing. If the average person can't read your application and understand, then you may want to go back and edit and make sure it's really direct and intellectually accessible. Keeping in mind that juries have members from different artistic disciplines, they may not have your specific expertise. So just make sure that the average person can understand what you're writing about. And finally, my top tip is always to sit on a jury. That may not be relevant to you right now, but in general, that is the best way to support your grant writing practice. So please consider sitting on a jury. If it's possible through CKAF, great, but also OAC or other local organizations, even sitting on a selection committee. It just helps change your perspective on how those processes work. And it just can be really beneficial for grant writing. So those are our tips. We can move into the Q&A. We're just going to pull up our contact page really quickly. Again, it's us. But if you have any questions about CKAF, contact grants@artskingston.ca. You will reach either Shamara or Catherine, and our phone number is there as well. And we're going to now turn off the recording so we can have our Q&A session so that you